BookTube, I'm Vanessa and today I'm here to do my September wrap-up. So first I want to mention a book that I am going to be DNFing for now, and that is The Happy Prince and Other Fairy Tales by Oscar Wilde. If you don't know, Oscar Wilde was an author during the Victorian time period and he was a leader of the aesthetic movement. A lot of his work is very humorous and very funny, but in a way that is actually really like sharp-edged and really criticizing the way that society was during those times, and that's what his fairy tales are like too. But the reason that I'm DNFing them for now is that they're also just a little bit boring. I can't like find myself getting wrapped up in them and like wanting to read more. I'm always like, okay, I'm gonna read one of these because it's like a chore right now that I have to do, and that's not how I want to feel about reading. So I've read like this far in the book and I'm going to be DNFing it until I am more in the mood to come back to it. And then I want to tell you guys about one of the best books that I have read, probably the best book that I've read this year, honestly, and that is Bloodwater Paint by Joy McCollough. This book is a kind of fictionalized, told in verse account of the story of Artemisia Gentileschi, and honestly I've filmed this section of this video about 10 times because it's so important to me and I want to make sure that I'm doing it right, and I've decided I just need to make a separate review video for this where I really want to go into detail about how important and relevant and amazing this book is. But for now, for this review, I just want to say that it is about Artemisia Gentileschi, who was a female Baroque painter and one of the only prominent female painters of her time. Something that she's really known for is the way that her paintings depict women, and another thing that she's really known for is the fact that when she was a teenager, her painting tutor raped her and she pressed charges against him and took him to court and had to go through the whole circus of being the one to make an accusation against someone and yet somehow still ending up as the person being investigated and the person having to prove herself and the person who is at risk of having her career and her reputation and her life ruined, while her rapist, the one who is supposed to be getting in trouble, is basically getting off scot-free. And as of the time that I'm filming this, yesterday was the Brett Kavanaugh hearing. Brett Kavanaugh is a judge who is currently trying to be appointed to the Supreme Court, which will make laws about women's rights for the next foreseeable future. And he is also being accused of sexual assault, and they had his hearing yesterday, and it is much the same thing. Somehow it is the women that are accusing him that are under fire and that are enduring so much and are being so brave to come forward with their stories, even though sadly and disgustingly probably the man who sexually assaulted them is still going to end up in a position of power, and many people are not going to care or not going to believe them or even going to be angry with them for having the nerve to come forward. And so much of that is discussed in this book, and I just think that it is so relevant. I was reading this in the airport on my way to Book Nut Fest and I was crying in public. Like, it is so important and so touching, and I really want everyone to read this book. I know that some people have had trouble connecting with it, I think because they don't have the context about like the history and who Artemisia is and what her paintings are. And this book doesn't do a great job of going into detail about that stuff, but I think if you like read her Wikipedia page or something and then read this book, I would really recommend it. And again, I'm gonna put up a whole review video for this, so if you're interested in hearing more about Artemisia and about the context of this story and how important it is, keep your eye out for that. Okay, on to other books. The next book that I read in September was This Arc of Broken Things by Lauren Oliver, which I got at Book Nut Fest and I was so excited about. This comes out on October 18th and it is basically a YA mystery slash kind of thriller, I guess. This book is about two girls who were accused of murdering their best friend when they were 13. They were all really into this fantasy story and they would write fan fiction for it and they would dress up as the characters and stuff. And unfortunately, their best friend was killed in a kind of ritualistic way that is actually described in the fan fiction that they were all writing together. So obviously the comparison has been made before to the whole Slender Man killing thing that went on a few years ago with the little girls that either tried to kill or did kill their best friend because Slender Man or whatever. Kind of the same concept, but these girls did not do it. And so now 5 years later, they are 18 and they are adults and they have ran back into each other and are now kind of wrapped up in trying to figure out what did happen and who did kill their best friend. I did enjoy this book. It kept me hooked. It kept me turning pages wanting to find out what was gonna happen. I liked the writing. I thought the writing was very beautiful and yet very harsh at the same time. Some things to note is that this is a very content warning filled book, so there is a lot of bad stuff that happens, I would recommend checking out the trigger warnings and content warnings before you start reading if you're concerned about anything like that. I have also seen people mentioning that the fat representation in this book is not very good. There is a fat character and she's portrayed as very confident and very beautiful. She's a model, she has a YouTube channel. Like, I think she's a very cool character, but I can definitely see how the subject of her fatness was sometimes talked about in an insensitive way in the story, and sometimes the things that other characters said weren't challenged the right way on the page. Again, I liked her as a character, but I see what people are saying about the representation itself not being good. Another complaint that I would have about this is that the thriller aspect of it is just not very thrilling. It was interesting to follow and wait for the mystery to unfold and everything, but honestly the big reveal and all that, it just kind of felt very anticlimactic, and I wasn't super like thrilled by that aspect of this book. But that being said, it didn't stop me from really enjoying this book. I kind of ate it up. I couldn't stop thinking about it when I wasn't reading it. I just wanted to go back to reading it. Like I said, I really thought that the writing was very beautiful, and I think it had such a good and interesting dynamic between kind of like the beautiful, whimsical, like fantasy type writing that is in this book calls kind of to the story that these girls liked. It was a fantasy story, and I think the writing kind of pulls that out of the fiction realm and into the reality realm. I thought that it was beautifully done, but then the parts that are very real and very dark are written in a way that really feels visceral and feels bad, and I think that that was such a amazing contrast, and I really liked the way that the author did it. Again, this comes out on October 18th, and I do recommend checking it out if you're not going to be bothered by any of the negatives that I mentioned. Finally, the last book that I read in September was Fever by Lauren De Stefano. This is the sequel to Wither. The trilogy is called the Chemical Garden Trilogy, and the concept of it is that in the future, some medical breakthrough that cured diseases and stuff worked for one generation, and they're fine and they're living out their lives, but from then on their children and their grandchildren all have this defect, I guess, where they're only living until their 20s, and then they get a fever and they die. The story follows a girl named Ryan who is captured and sold into a polygamous marriage, which is a thing that happens in the world now because of the whole dystopia. This series is actually a reread for me. I read it when I was a teenager, and I still loved the first book in the series so much. I thought it was so good. But rereading this second book was a little bit meh for me. I found this book to be a little boring. It also, I feel like it deals with so many very sensitive topics, such as sexual assault, prostitution. There are medical experiments going on which are very unethical, and some of them involve children, and in a way that's a little bit jarring, and I don't know how I feel about the way that the book kind of handles those topics. I don't want to say that it does it badly, but I'm also not necessarily sure that it's giving them the gravity that they need. However, besides that, like I said, I still loved the first book. The thing that bothered me about the second book was that I just felt like nothing happened. You know, it's like very filler. The plot stuff happened, but none of it was anything that mattered or changed the position of the story. Like, the story did not progress in the second book. We ended the second book in almost the exact same position that we were in at the end of the first book. Like, this book could have disappeared into thin air and probably wouldn't have made a difference to the overall story. I do still want to reread the third book and finish out the series again, but I think I'm gonna wait for a little bit because I'm more excited to do Halloween reading because October is coming up, and this book just didn't give me enough hype to make me want to read the third one instead of reading Halloween books, if you know what I mean. So those are all of the things that I read in September. I hope that you guys liked this video. If you did, go ahead and give it a thumbs up because that really helps me, and if you're not already subscribed to my channel, you could do that too if you wanted. I talk about books every Monday and Thursday, and sometimes when I have time and I'm not horribly too busy to do it, I play video games on Saturdays. Let me know in the comments what you read in September, or if you have read any of these books, and I hope that I get to talk to you soon. Bye!